The type of corruption that I really hope Bobby exposes is the type where they're doing the bidding of the large companies as opposed to protecting America's health, whether it's with big pharma, whether it's big ag, whether it's big food processing. I come from the private sector. I have no problem with big businesses. I've got a problem when you have a large business using their power to corrupt the process, to capture the regulatory agencies. You've got a revolving door of personnel. I mean, you pay a government employee a royalty on some patentable drug. Are they going to really do a very good job of determining is that really safe? What gives me hope is I think most Americans agree on the big issue. We're a horribly divided nation, but there's no reason for us to be divided. What I hope Bobby Kennedy can do is expose all this so that more people have their eyes open.
These people that Trump has put forward to run different sectors of the government, how likely is it that somebody like RFK Jr. is actually going to be running these? Senator Ron Johnson, welcome to my podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Mikhaila.
Yeah, this should be fun. I guess first off, I should thank you for letting me speak at the Roundtable a few months ago. That was a huge opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad you've been hosting these roundtables, kind of talking about, well, things that are often shied away from. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I really appreciate you presenting. I did not know your story. It's an amazing story. You're looking good. I hope you're feeling good.
I am. I'm feeling fine. When did you start doing those roundtables? I know you did one on COVID a number of years ago when it was really not the time to be talking about it. Well,
I was chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. Had nothing really to do with health, but when the pandemic struck. I started holding hearings while I was still chairman in February. Found out that we don't make precursor chemicals. We don't do active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is a real vulnerability we have as a nation. Then in May, I brought in John Ioannidis, who had done the analysis of the Princess Cruise data, just to calm everybody down. Again, this was kind of the start of the pandemic. So this is not Ebola. It's not SARS. It's not MERS. It might be twice as bad as a bad flu season. So don't freak out. If you're elderly, if you have certain comorbidities, take precautions. For the rest of us, we'll probably get over it. Then in November and December of 2020, before the vaccine had any emergency use authorization, I had Peter McCulloch, Harvey Risch, a bunch of other people come in, talk about hydroxychloroquine. The following month, I had Pierre Corey come in, talk about ivermectin. He was definitely confident. He had the data. He had his manuscript, provide that to NIH, and the pandemic's over. Little did he know the vested interests that wanted a vaccine and were going to crush and sabotage any early treatment. So that was as chairman. And then we lost the majority. I timed out as chairman, so all I could really do is hold public events. So the first public event I held was in June of 2021 because nobody was advocating for the vaccine injury. So Ken Ruckers, who was a football star with Green Bay Packers, his wife is vaccinated. He's not a Wisconsin resident, but he'd heard of my work, so he contacted me, and I said, "Well, if you're willing to put yourself out there, I'm happy to use my platform and develop a forum where people like Bree Dressen, Maddie DeGarry, his wife Cheryl, a couple other individuals who were vaccine injured could tell their story." Now, I was hoping, again, this is June of 2020. This is when everybody's safe and effective, right? Well, it wasn't. I was hoping that all the TV cameras there'd be a reporter or two that would have some measure of sympathy for those individuals, but they didn't. The first question out of their mouths was, Ken Ruckers, you going to use this forum to sue people? You going to try and make money off of this? It was grotesque. But I followed that up with another hearing in Washington, D.C. with not only vaccine injury, but also medical experts and medical researchers to talk about that. And then probably the more famous public event was in January of 2022, COVID-19, a second opinion. And that's where I assembled a lot of these individuals, and we just laid on the line. Followed that up in December of 2022, where we talked specifically more about the vaccine. The genetic injection. It's not a vaccine. Exactly how it works, how it could potentially cause the injuries that we were seeing. And so that was kind of the model, the template. I've done some other ones, but it was just my pleasure to host RFK Jr., you and your dad, Casey and Callie Means. And by the way, that was all prompted by I saw the interview with Tucker Carlson with Casey and Callie Means, and I said, this is something that we need to provide a platform and highlight it. So I couldn't have been more pleased with the presentations by people like you, the attention it has garnered. And again,
Yeah.
give all the credit to Casey and Callie Means and RF Kennedy Jr. for really highlighting this issue, and particularly Bobby Kennedy for having the courage to suspend his presidential campaign, join forces with President Trump, lay their differences aside, focus on an area of agreement, because not only do we have hopes of addressing chronic illness, but it truly is a demonstration of how you can heal and unify a very divided nation.
I completely agree. Was there something that kind of led you down the path of skepticism that I guess you saw in the government when you were working? Because you were one of the first people to have some skepticism towards the vaccine or just the response towards COVID. And then recently with this health epidemic, not everybody's talking about it. So is there something that made you skeptical initially?
I think I'm just a skeptic in general. My background, I'm an accountant. Ran a manufacturing plant that produced plastic packaging materials for medical devices, so I understood the industry. I came here because we were merging our kids' future. I didn't come here to investigate, but I became chairman of the Senate Oversight Committee, basically. And so I started doing investigations. So I saw corruption within the FBI, within the Department of Justice, within our intelligence agencies. So I already saw corruption within federal government agencies to the detriment of the American public. And then when COVID happened, our response to COVID, none of it made sense to me. Peter McCulloch had the four pillars of pandemic response. Try and limit the spread, early treatment, hospital treatment, and vaccines. And we certainly tried to stop the spread by destroying our economy, destroying small businesses. Again, that didn't make sense. But we completely sabotaged early treatment, hospital treatment. Let's face it, they developed protocols that killed people. You slap somebody on a ventilator, 80, 90% chance they weren't ever going to get off. So everything was directed toward a vaccine very early on. I was talking to the CEO of one of the manufacturers of hydroxychloroquine through April, and he's really excited about this. He provided like 30,000 doses to the national stockpile, and they were going to do all kinds of studies. They're going to come out toward the end of May. But all of a sudden, tail end of April, early May, the communication just went dead silent. It's like everybody in the industry just agreed, we're going to focus on the vaccine, nothing else. And then fortunately for me, I got connected with Michael Yeadon, who for 30 years was an employee of Pfizer company. His specialty is toxicity. He was, in the end of his career, the senior vice president in terms of research for Pfizer. He could not believe what his colleagues were developing. He was beside himself. He said, Ron, there's a whole list of ingredients that we do not put into injectables because they're toxic to the body. When I found out that they were going to produce an injectable that caused the body cells to produce something that was toxic to it, he literally could not believe that until he researched it further and found out, no, that's exactly what they're going to do. So he came out and became very public of it. And again, fortunately, he educated me. There was no way I was ever going to get that injection. And I started trying to warn people very early on. Again, I'm not a doctor, not a medical researcher, but I just used what information was available publicly, the VAERS report. I'm the first one that probably got censored with my VAERS chart showing this explosion in deaths associated with the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, I presented that, I think, end of April to Francis Collins. We had a meeting with a bunch of Republican senators and said, Dr. Collins, they're all patting themselves on the back because they finally got tests out, okay? I'm talking to Francis Collins. Are you watching VAERS? I think at the time there were a few thousand deaths. 46% of those deaths were occurring on the day of vaccination within 2 days.
Wow.
So when I confronted him with that, he said, well, Senator, we've associated 6 deaths with the child, it was a child age bearing women that associated with J&J caused by clotting. But those 6 deaths, otherwise he said, Senator, people die. That's what a cavalier attitude he had toward that. So that, really raised my antenna in terms of, the corruption, in terms of the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, in terms of just ignoring the safety signals that were screaming at them. And they continue to ignore it. They continue to cover it up. So, no, I've seen the corruption sense. We should have always been pushing early treatment. We should have been, exploring. And by the way, he lied to me at the end of December of 2020 when I pressed him from those hearings. What is the NIH doing in terms of exploring early treatment? Oh, Senator, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on exploring every molecule on the shelf. So, okay, well, show me where you're spending the money. Show me what you've studied. Never got that information. So again, these guys have been lying to me since really day one, since the COVID pandemic occurred, and they haven't stopped lying, and they certainly haven't been transparent to the American public. So no, I wouldn't trust them further than I could throw them. Wow. Okay.
I think something that would be helpful to people, like especially people who are more on the like liberal or Democratic side, is when RFK Jr. is talking about corruption. You know, what is he referring to? So when you referred to corruption you saw in the FBI and the CDC, et cetera, what exactly are you seeing? What does that mean?
So it takes different forms. In the FBI, Department of Justice, the intelligence communities, you've got people that, you know, are generally left-leaning, and they're deep state actors. I mean, they look at a Republican president, and they definitely say this too shall pass. They probably have the same attitude toward any president, but again, they're more than likely to do the bidding of somebody, you know, left of center president versus Donald Trump. They completely sabotage his administration. That's that type of corruption. The type of corruption that I really hope, you know, Bobby exposes is the type where you have the corporate interests. I come from the private sector. I have no problem with big businesses. I've got a problem when you have a large business using their power to corrupt the process, to capture the regulatory agencies. And again, I'm not for big regulation either, but we need some. Okay, we actually need a government body that ensures safety of food and health. But that agency has to be of high integrity and not corruptible, not captured. So what we've seen is these large businesses that are regulated by these agencies. They're not stupid. They've got all kinds of power. They figure out how to capture those agencies. You know, you've got a revolving door of personnel. You remember the kind of famous video with James O'Keefe where he's interviewing a guy from Pfizer, and they're just talking about the revolving door. You take a look at all the FDA heads that are now either, you know, on the boards of directors of Moderna or of Pfizer or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a revolving door. So it's corrupted the process. You see the royalties being paid to government employees. I mean, you pay a government employee a royalty on some patentable drug. Are they going to really do a very good job of determining is that really safe? And we've seen it time and time and time again of these drugs just, you know, some of them just flying through the approval process, like the COVID injection. Without the science backing it up, billions being made. So again, it's that corporate capture of the agencies, the revolving door. And so they're doing the bidding of the large companies as opposed to protecting America's health, whether it's with big pharma, whether it's big ag, whether it's big food processing. The military-industrial complex. Remember, Eisenhower warned us about this in his farewell address. The military-industrial complex. We also said, you know, be careful of federal government funding of research. It will corrupt research. It has. You know, 70% of scientific studies. There was a survey done in Nature magazine in 2016. 70% those studies, the data can't be replicated.
That's
you
insane.
had the head of the New England Journal of Medicine resign in 2000. She later started writing about why she resigned. I'm going to read the quote from, this is Marcia Angel. This was in 2009. She said, similar conflicts of interest and biases exist in virtually every field of medicine, particularly those that rely heavily on drugs or devices. It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. She said, I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, again, she resigned in 2000. So we've known about this now for decades, and you understand how powerful these interests are. Okay, the big corporations, big government, they've suppressed all that truth. And what I hope Bobby Kennedy can do is expose all this so that more people have their eyes opened, as certainly I did, and as a million other Americans have had our eyes opened during COVID. We saw what a miserably failed response that was, and they're still not admitting it. They're going to do it again with now bird flu or some other, pandemic X. They got, I mean, they're so bold as they're just coming up with a name.
Yeah.
Something's going to happen, and we're going to have to take control. That's all the amendments to the WHO treaty and stuff. So we need more Americans. We need more people globally with their eyes open in terms of what is happening to us.
Why did I decide to build an online university? Well,
there is a crisis now in higher education.
The president of Harvard University resigned today, weeks after
calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct.
We have a problem of affordability and cost, spiraling student loans. We have a groupthink emerging, and that warps the entire academic enterprise.
I experimented with putting my lectures online and found that I could teach far more people at very low cost than I could at the university. And I thought, well, why not scale that? What I'm hoping to do is to find the best lectures in the world and to bring them to as wide as possible an audience.
He came to me and he basically said, I want you to do the best course that you've always wanted to do.
We want to bring you the highest quality education possible at the lowest possible price.
It's extremely high-level content that anybody can use to educate themselves, and it's available to everybody.
Well, that would be good. I think it's funny, because I got canceled at the university, so I could try to return the favor.
I was shocked. So I've always, from my experience, being chronically ill and managing to put it into remission with diet, which was mind-blowing to begin with, I got skeptical about anything I knew beforehand because I was like, I had total faith in the medical system, and then I fixed it by removing foods, something like incurable by removing foods. And so I lost faith in a lot of institutions. Do you think the solution to the corruption is as simple as not allowing, like you said, the revolving door? I can't even believe that's allowed. I thought that they would have put some sort of rules in place so that you couldn't work at all these institutions. That seems to be just the logical thing to do. That, and then the government payouts from these large corporations, that needs to stop. Are those the two simple solutions to the corruption problem, at least that Bobby Kennedy is looking into?
The overall solution is the truth.
Yeah.
Uncovering it and exposing it. But I think there's three fundamental problems right now. Maybe four in terms of what you're talking about, the royalties. But first is, again, the corruption of science. We need a high integrity arbiter of the truth within science. Now, there's a whole reason why science is corrupted. Yeah, federal government funding, other people funding. I mean, if you're funding research, you're going to get the result you want. Okay, so those who fund it get the result they want. That's not science. When it comes to vaccines, I mean, the fact that you have no liability. And listen, I'm a private sector guy. I avoided lawyers in the judicial process like a plague. Okay, lawyers aren't my favorite profession, but they play a key role in terms of adversarial process to keep people honest. Okay, and the other fundamental problem is pharmaceutical advertising. I mean, if you look at those ads, I mean, I have no idea what those drugs are for. But if you listen to all the side effects, which, by the way, they only have to publish a portion of them. If they had to list the entire list of adverse events that they know about with these drugs, it'd probably take 2 minutes of the commercial. So the only reason they're spending billions on media and social media, pharmaceutical companies, is to capture the narrative. And they captured it during COVID. They were able to capture it to such extent that they were able to censor people like Bobby Kennedy or my VAERS chart. They turned the truth into misinformation and malinformation. Okay, so that's got to be a real problem. Then the other issue you're talking about, the revolving door, the royalties being paid. I mean that's just an obvious area where corruption is going to occur. So again, there's some just fundamental issues that need to be addressed that way, which would go a long way toward helping fix the problem, because we need somebody to assure food and drug safety. And by the way, we need drug companies. I'm not the only guy that wants a life-saving new cure, but when you see drug companies using their power to get a new drug, patentable drug approved that doesn't work as well as the current drug that's generic or other molecules. I mean, that's why they sabotage early treatment with things like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. There's no money in it. Those things were pennies a tablet versus remdesivir, which knocks out your kidneys. okay, or the vaccine. Tens, hundreds of billions of dollars spent on that injection.
Yeah, wild. Okay, so and my dad's Canadian. I live in the U.S., thank goodness. But I'm not as familiar with U.S. politics as I should be. These people that Trump has put forward to run different sectors of the government, he's suggesting they have to be signed off by the Senate, correct?
Correct, yeah. We have a confirmation process here. So he nominates, and then they go through Senate hearings, and then we vote the nominees up or down.
And so how likely is it that somebody like RFK Jr. is actually going to be running these, or that DOGE is going to exist, things like that?
Well, DOGE is going to exist outside the government, so nothing else right there. Yeah, and I think it's interesting, Elon Musk, and he'll find people. He wants people with really high IQ, willing to work 80 hours a week. He'll probably make them work longer based on the book I've read about him. He wants them to work for free. So because he's Elon Musk, he'll probably find people. That's outside of government. I've started contacting and talking to my Senate colleagues about Bobby's confirmation. I think most have a very open mind. I think they've got questions based on the lies being told about Bobby.
Yeah.
So I think many, hopefully most, enough, will have the same reaction that I've had to Bobby Kennedy once I met him. Found, first of all, he's a really good person, and he's really smart. And what he's telling us is the truth. I mean, he's the one that really proved that Fauci was lying to us when he said, "Oh, we got all kinds of studies showing that, the childhood vaccines have been tested against a true placebo." No, not one. So if Fauci is willing to lie to us about that, the biodistribution of the injection throughout the body, Pfizer knew that they had a biodistribution study that Japanese regulators uncovered with the lipid nanoparticle. By the way, the lipid nanoparticle is designed to permeate difficult to permeate barriers, like the blood-brain barrier, like the
obviously.
So they knew, but it's going to stay right in the arm. It's going to do its work and then dissolve. Well, it's not real mRNA. It's modified. It's modified to not dissolve. And so now we know it circulates through the body. The only studies so far, length of time is at least 2 months and possibly more. And again, that's circulating through the body, concentrating things like the ovaries, other organs, turning those organs into a little manufacturing site for something that's toxic to the body. So when you're doing that and you express the spike protein, whether it's the heart, then the body attacks that. That's called inflammation. That's called myocarditis. If it's into your nerve cells, all the neurological symptoms we're seeing. We see DNA contamination could be causing some of these turbo cancers. And again, I'm not a doctor, not a medical expert, but the mechanism seems pretty straightforward in terms of exercising caution and really watching your safety surveillance systems, which they didn't do. They covered them up. They're still covering them up.
Ridiculous. I think a general rule for any new drug, particularly something that's injected, but anything you're putting in your body, is like, watch, right? If it just comes out immediately, they can't possibly have done long-term studies. There hasn't been enough time, period. It was at least be that careful, right?
There's a different side of the coin here. Okay, part of the problem you have in drug manufacturers, it takes like a dozen, 10, 13 years to approve a drug and costs $1 billion. Okay, so that's a lot of money to develop a drug. That's why I championed right to try. So let individuals know. But again, that's why you need an honest broker. You need an agency that has high integrity. Okay, do some initial safety studies. You don't necessarily have to prove efficacy before something that looks pretty promising could be made available on a right to try basis. Let people make the decision. But boy, you have to monitor that. I mean, anybody taking something on a right to try has got to be filling out, and their doctors have to be filling out, reports to the FDA. So track your disease. Track any kind of reaction you might have to that drug. Again, in the information age, this shouldn't be that hard. Yeah. And by the way, it wasn't. You had the VSAE system. Pretty darn good idea, quite honestly, if it would have been designed properly and if they wouldn't have buried the results. But the VSAE system was a voluntary app that 10 million Americans signed up for. and it reported any kind of adverse events. Now, it was very limited. They talked about, any kind of medical intervention, if you had to seek medical care for an adverse event, or if you, couldn't carry on with daily miss you had to miss work, had to miss school, okay? And so 25% of the people that signed up for VSAIC missed work. I mean, they had an adverse event that was strong enough that something happened in their life. I mean, they missed school, they missed work, they couldn't carry on their normal daily life. Almost 8%, I think it was 7.8%, sought medical care. And Aaron Siri had to sue for the results of that VSAFE. Again, they set this up. I mean, you had VAERS, which was screaming at him. You set up VSAFE specifically for the COVID injection, and then they buried the results. So Aaron Siri had to sue them to reveal to the public what the VSAFE system was screaming at them. Again, 25% of people that took the shot, 25% of 10 million people, 2.5 million people basically, had a severe enough adverse event that they missed school or work. And 8%, almost 8% had to seek medical care. And our government buried that. Our government also buried, by the way, I just have my most recent letter to the agencies. They buried the fact that they knew about myocarditis in youth very early in 2021, and rather than publish that information or warn the public, they produced a 17-page document of talking points to talk around it. Again, I think Aaron Siri got that from FOIA, but those 17 pages are completely redacted. So I just sent an oversight letter demanding to see those pages, because now we know it exists, unredacted, because Congress is not subject to those redactions. But at the same time, we've been battling for, I think, over 3 years, trying to get Fauci's emails, the final, I think, 50 pages of Fauci's emails unredacted. I've been trying to get that for 3 years.
That's wild. Okay. So then can you describe exactly what it is you do? You said the Senate Oversight Committee, you head that?
Yeah, so I was chairman for 6 years of it's the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. So the governmental affairs, prior to 9/11, was strictly the Senate over. I timed out of that chairmanship. Now I'm ranking member of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. It's literally the most powerful investigatory body of the U.S. Senate. I have stronger subpoena power as chairman of this committee than I had as chairman of the full committee. Okay, so that again, I'm also on Finance Committee, I'm also on Budget Committee. So as U.S. Senator, you're involved in all kinds of different committees. But as it relates to this, I've got some real ability now to investigate and demand answers and demand documents. Now, the question is, are they going to be honest with you and actually turn over the documents? Mm-hmm. You never, again, I'm not in the agencies. I have suggested that President Trump is going to need to appoint like a Secretary of Information Extraction.
That's ridiculous.
Somebody to get the deep state to, be honest and provide these documents. President Trump, switching subjects here, President Trump has said he's going to release the JFK assassination documents. Yeah. Does anybody really think the CIA or whoever the powers would be, the intel community, is actually going to give them all up? I have my doubts. I don't trust government. By the way, our founders didn't trust government. That's why we put in place systems of checks and balances so that we would be kind of fighting between the branches so that no branch would get so powerful as it would impact our freedom. Well, those constitutional constraints went out the window many, many decades ago, and now as government grows, our freedoms are definitely being trampled on, as you know, not only in America, but look what happened in Canada.
Yeah.
The Freedom Convoy, those brave truckers. I mean, what Pierre Trudeau did there, what was happening in Australia. I mean, this is a global phenomenon.
Yeah, it's an insane time. Hopefully things are trending in the right direction. Did the results from the last election fill you with hope? Do you think he's actually going to be able to do what he says he's going to do? I know he wants to. Right.
Well, again, what gives me hope is literally the coalition that he and Bobby Kennedy helped assemble. And what that demonstrates. But I mean, you take a look at whether it's Bobby Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, who I don't think is particularly politically active, probably more of the left in general. That's what we need in this country. We need people who love this country, understand how rare and precious it truly is, and how it's our duty to make sure we save and preserve it for future generations. That wasn't happening. Our country was going down the tubes, under radical leftist government, which is what the Obama and the Biden administration was. So this is, ship of state is big, it's unwieldy, it's difficult to turn around. What we've done is we've changed directions. We're charting a new course, but we need to stay in that direction. We can't be ping-ponging back and forth between radical leftism and what I would consider just a common sense approach to respecting people's freedoms, understanding what the federal government is really designed to do. It's not here to solve all our problems. Mm-hmm. It's here to guarantee our freedom. Now, there are other, commerce, you have to set the rules for the road. Again, I think it's a very legitimate activity of government to establish some high integrity arbiters of science, of drug safety, food safety. I mean, that's a valuable role. But we don't need these agencies that are just massive, cranking out all these regulations that are crushing freedom. We need honest brokers.
Yeah, agreed. So you mentioned that DOGE wasn't going to be a government institution. I didn't know that. I thought that he was building something new that was within the government. DOGE is supposed to be an external organization that just...
Right.
How is it going to have any control over anything?
Well, it's the arena of ideas, right? If it comes up with good ideas, and by the way, we can't do anything here in Washington. I mean, you can jam some stuff through, but it's not going to last if he doesn't have the backing of the public. So you mentioned about my events. I mean, my events have always been designed. I've never proposed a piece of legislation after my events. My events have all been about exposing the truth, educating the public, opening up people's eyes. Yeah. And that's what it's going to take. The beauty of what we found during COVID is once somebody's eyes have been opened to what is happening, to the capture, to the corruption, to the harm being caused by big government to individuals, they're not going to close their eyes. Mm-hmm. They just won't. So I think I haven't really talked in detail to Bobby because he's been so darn busy, but I would love to really sit down and talk to him about surprised at how welcome he was to our side of the aisle. In that event, he said, I used to be a supervillain to him. Again, he listened to the news like most Americans do, and guys like me are caricatured. We are marginalized, demonized, we're villainized. Okay, so once Bobby actually met me and saw what I was trying to do, and he doesn't think I'm a supervillain anymore. So that's powerful. And again, Bobby Kennedy's right. Other Democrats have said this. I didn't leave the party left me. So those are generally the most valued partners into what I would consider the conservative movement. But that's what gives me hope, is that once people understand what's happened, they'll be dedicated to keep moving in the right direction. And the more that open their eyes, the stronger our coalition builds, and the more elections we can win, so we can keep our nation on the right path. Mm-hmm.
I think it surprised me too, and my dad. Like growing up, I lived in downtown Toronto, which is very liberal, and was always a liberal person. I went to an art school, and my parents were liberals too. And it wasn't until things started to go sideways at the university, Dad kind of saw that, we were never this far left that you see popping up. It was like sane liberals, right? And I've been trying to explain, to my friends who are they're still in Canada, they're still liberals, that what we used to believe isn't what the Liberal Party believes anymore. It's completely different, And I think it has surprised me that the Republican Party has been so welcoming to people that were previously Democrats. Do you think it's possible that the Republican Party has gone, and I don't want to say more left, but I don't think RFK Jr.'s beliefs, for instance, have changed very much in the last 30 years. But now those beliefs are held by members of the Republican Party. So do you think everything's shifted a little bit left? What are you seeing? I assume you've been a lifelong Republican. Have you?
I'm still not a Republican. I'm more Tea Party.
Okay.
I'm not of this world. I was never involved in politics. During the Tea Party movement, I stepped forward because we're mortgaging our kids' future. Okay, and I'm fighting for freedom. Okay, so that's
fair enough.
Okay, But you got to join a party, right? I'm not all that enamored with a lot of people in the Republican Party. Okay, so I'm part of that coalition, okay. But what we have seen is realignment of politics. I mean, I think in the past, Republicans definitely represented those big corporate interests, and Democrats, really focused on the working men and women of this country. I mean, the little people, the people that needed help. But the fact of the matter is, we're all very compassionate in America. We all want to help people who can't help themselves or help people help themselves. And I think what Donald Trump has done is literally complete realignment. Now it's Democrats who are, they've always been beholden to the trial lawyers, which is an enormous lobby and corporate interest. But now they're the ones that are populated with all these billionaires that are funding all this crazy radical leftism. And Republicans really, I mean, we do represent normal, hardworking men and women, the people that build this country, that keep it operating. I'd like to think we always did, maybe not in as intelligent way as we should. I mean, you got to support business because businesses are the ones that create products and services and hire people, create good paying jobs. Okay, that's something that I think the Democrats never really got is don't rip into businesses. Okay, try and support businesses. Try and make it easy for them to build themselves and create great products and services and employ people. Don't make that harder. Try and make it easier within the constraints of, antitrust. Don't let monopolies grow. Don't let them pollute our environment. Don't let them get away with poisoning ourselves with food and drugs. So I think Republicans have probably become more populist than we were in the past, but I think our hearts were always there. And again, I think what gives me hope is I think most Americans agree on the big issues. That's why I say, we're a horribly divided nation, but there's no reason for us to be divided. We're not a naturally divided people. On the major goals in life, safety, security, having a job, having enough opportunity so you can provide for yourself and your family, your retirement, everybody agrees on that. So, okay, I understand that there's differences. How do you achieve that? But we're all focusing on that same goal. So why are we so divided? Well, I mean, let me be partisan. It's because the left is purposely dividing us, right? That's what identity politics is about. That's what critical race theory is about.
Yeah.
So I think so much the transgenderists. Listen, we're compassionate people. Anybody with true gender dysphoria, we have all kinds of compassion for. But telling little boys they need to be little girls when they're little kids, mutilating their bodies without their parent approval. I mean, that is, by the way, that was, I think, thoroughly rejected in this election. But I can't really say thoroughly because almost half of Americans voted for the party that is pushing that. So listen, we still have great concerns. I mean, we're that close. It shouldn't be that close.
No.
The contrast between common sense and conservative principles and love of freedom versus the absolute insanity of radical leftism, it shouldn't be close, but it is globally.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of work cut out for us.
No, that's for sure. And I think it'd be interesting to see a study between people who voted Democrat and people who still trust mainstream media like CNN and these news websites. Because I assume anybody who voted for Kamala, they're getting their news from CNN or mainstream media. Otherwise, I don't see how it's possible. Like, they have to believe the caricatures of people that they're painting.
Well, but it's not just media. Remember, controlled by the left, as your dad found out, right?
Yeah.
That was the master stroke of the left. They took over our universities in the 60s. And so it's all radical left deans and professors, and they've been teaching our children, indoctrinating them now for decades. And so it's all coming to fruition. Again, that's why their eyes have been closed to reality, because they've been indoctrinated to radical leftism. That's the eye-opening process. But again, the truth has its own power. And once your eyes are open, this isn't as I thought it was. We got those people on our side for life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think that's a good idea about DOGE then, and your roundtables. Like, even when we did the recent roundtable on nutrition, I was like, the only way, you're not going to change people's opinions by pushing through bills. You have to educate them. They have to know what's going on. They have to know that certain foods aren't good or that the food pyramid wasn't designed without corruption. if people knew these things, then they'd automatically change. Like I assume people, I'm not sure, but I assume people didn't really stop smoking cigarettes until everybody knew that long-term cigarette smoking could cause lung disease. And then you don't really want to do that long-term, right? It wasn't Congress pushing it through or the Senate pushing anything through that changed people's minds. It was education.
Right. No, in my own family, my parents smoked. And when I remember listening to the news program when I was probably like 6, 7 years, this is early 60s, so I'm 6, 7, 8 years old. And I heard that cigarette smoking may cause cancer. I mean, you could not believe how we badgered our parents for years until they finally quit. It's like, that scared the you-know-what out of me.
Yeah.
So it's people have to do it voluntarily. I mean, you don't want the long arm of government forcing you to action. No. That's freedom robbing. But give people the information. Government, again, I don't want them to be an arbiter of the truth, but we do need, and maybe we need institutions outside of government that can be, high integrity in terms of, no, this science is reproducible. I believe this is true. Studies on drugs, that kind of stuff, they don't have to produce their data. So they issue a study, gets peer reviewed, but the peer reviewers don't even get to see the data of the study that they're reviewing.
Oh, man.
I mean, to me, that's a total corruption. I mean, that's my understanding. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah.
The reason I'm hedging my bets is it's so unbelievable. But I think that's actually true because I know I've helped people try and get to the data of these studies that's being published. So.
Yeah. I think I've heard that as well. You said that there might need to be institutions outside of the government, but I feel like that's what people used to think the news was. The news was supposed to uncover these kind of things and tell you the truth. And so we're missing, old school news. I don't know when it switched. I know I certainly didn't trust it in 2016 in Canada. So it probably fell before that, but I don't even know when the news has been trustworthy.
Well, I think, again, when I'm growing up in the 60s, this is when the radical left's taking over the university system. So they start indoctrinating. They're not journalists anymore. They're advocates for the left. But that takes time. I mean, journalism used to have integrity. Even though Walter Cronkite, he probably always voted Democrat, they realized that, I can't let my bias out in my reporting, or they're going to fire me. That's not what the American public wants, unbiased news. But slowly but surely, the leftism started creeping into the news until it completely consumed it with the election of Donald Trump. That's where all pretense of being unbiased came with Donald Trump, bad man, orange man bad. We need to destroy him. This is our job as journalists. We have to destroy this man. And that's, I thought it was interesting when Bobby started his presidential campaign, one of the statements he made was this will be the first presidential election decided by podcasts. Now, I realized that was probably the only way he could ever win is because he was completely being boycotted by the mainstream media. He was only being allowed on conservative outlets. And his main, method of communicating his ideas was through podcasts. But again, third-party candidates, love the guy, but never really thought that had much of a chance. But in the end, he was right. Because I think what really put it over the top for Trump was he went on Joe Rogan. He went on, he went on these things. And without the filter of the mainstream media, people saw what I've seen with Donald Trump. I mean, if you spend time with him, I've frequently said, you cannot not like him. Now, there may be things that just aggravate you about the guy that you don't like, but he's charismatic, he's engaging, he's smart. You cannot not like him. And that's what the American public saw unfiltered in a 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan and all these other podcasts. So in the end, I think Bobby was probably right. It could have been, that might have been determinative for this election. All of a sudden it was cool.
Oh, yeah.
If you're a young man, particularly after his reaction to the assassination attempt, that even Zuckerberg would say that was the most bad thing he's ever seen, right? All of a sudden, for young men, they proudly wear Make America Great hat.
Yeah.
That was a sea in just a couple months. It was really remarkable to see this.
It was. I had an interesting experience. I went to Austin. This was right after the first assassination attempt. which we were shocked, especially from Trump's response, because it was so brave, right? Like, you can't fake that kind of response. And so we were talking to our Uber driver about it, and he goes, yeah, you know, someone must have been behind it. And we were like, yeah, someone was probably behind it. But we were on like different kind of sides of whatever conspiracy you want to call that. And he thought it was faked by the Republican Party because Trump was so brave after that nobody could have done that.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, wow, that's what you think? Like, that's what's going around?
No, they're trying to marginalize that reaction. That can't be real. I mean, nobody could be that badass. Nobody could be that brave. Yeah. This had to be a whole setup with a unbelievable, phenomenal marksman.
Yeah.
And time it just right. So he turns his head. And by the way, that was my chart.
Was it?
It was, yeah.
Oh.
I gave that to him on a plane flight up to the Green Bay rally in April.
Wow.
So, kind of fun to be that little smidgen of history.
Oh, man. Well, good job on the chart.
Life-saving.
Yeah, that's for sure. Life-saving chart.
Life-saving.
Ooh, wild. Okay. Well, do you have any concerns of like, oh my gosh, actually, you're more aware of this than me. What's going on in the news about whatever's happening in Ukraine recently? Do you have any knowledge about that? Is any of that true? Biden allowing more long-term missiles? Yes. Do you know anything about that?
Yes.
Yeah, is that real?
Yes, it's real. And there's no strategic purpose to it from I can see. I mean, they're launching these things at Russian positions around the area within Russia that Ukraine made a push into. So it's not going to change the tide of the war. It is provocative. It's a dangerous escalation. So Jeffrey Sachs, he's a person on the left, right? He gives the most accurate and salient explanation of how we walked our way into threatening World War III. Going back to 1991, I'm assuming he is starting out with the basic agreement between James Baker and Mikhaila Gorbachev that basically said, we're not going to push NATO 1 inch to the east. And we've come, Bobby talks about this all the time, we've come hundreds of miles. And then, even though, Putin basically accepted that, right? So, but Ukraine, that's a red line. You do not threaten putting, and we kept pushing him. And we spent, I think, $5 billion is what the reports are. McCain and Victoria Nuland fomenting the revolution of dignity, which sounds good. I mean, freedom-loving Ukrainians, let them escape Soviet domination and come toward the West. Nobody ever told me, as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the European chairman of the European subcommittee, that Ukraine was a really divided country. It might be 50-50. Half of them really rather be governed by Russia. The other half wants to go. Nobody explained that to me as I'm making codels there and trying to support the freedom-loving people of Ukraine. Then you push it further and threaten NATO. By the way, I think you probably could have prevented that war just by telling Putin, okay, don't invade. We're not going to offer Ukraine NATO membership. That would have been a good bargain, right?
Yeah.
They didn't do that. So in the end, Putin invaded. And now it's just a bloody state. And okay, you can say, and a lot of people blow it off, say, he'll never use nuclear weapons. I'll tell you one thing: Putin will not lose this war.
Yeah.
Losing the war is existential to Putin. Okay, he will not lose this war, and he does have nuclear weapons. So let's not press him. The only way this war ends is in a negotiated settlement. Every day that goes by, the settlement gets worse and worse and worse because more Ukrainians die, more Russian conscripts die. I take no joy in that. And more of Ukraine gets destroyed. So they send these ATACMS into Ukraine. And what's Russia's response? A massive strike at Ukraine's infrastructure, shutting down their electrical grid. So that's going to have to be repaired. We're just increasing the destruction of Ukraine so that, again, every day that goes by, whatever settlement we're going to get is going to be worse and worse and worse. And, of course, don't want to settle because can't let Putin win. Well, he's not going to lose. Yeah. And in the meantime, Ukraine just keeps losing more and more and more and more. Makes no sense. It's insane.
Yeah, I just don't understand why it was done so close to, a change in government. Like, why Why did it just happen? It seems rather dramatic to happen right before there's a huge shift in government.
I don't know. Is Biden literally trying to sabotage the Trump administration?
Oh my gosh.
I have no idea.
I
I can't explain the action of these radical leftists, people like Biden and Harris and Obama, and it makes no sense to me. It's not actions taken for the benefit of America and the American people.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Okay, well, is there anything else you'd like to tell people about? I think you've answered all my questions, but is there anything people should be aware of?
Well, we haven't spoken a whole lot about how we met is really the issue of chronic health and what we need to do to make it healthier.
How did you get interested in that? I was so shocked to ever be in a position where I was in Washington talking about diet. I was just like, that is never going to happen. So how did you get interested in that?
By the way, wasn't it cool when Senator Crapo showed up and he was able to tell his story like you were able to tell yours?
Yeah.
It's completely unscripted.
So yes, definitely.
That came about because of podcasts. So somebody sent me, or I saw Tucker's podcast with Casey and Callie Means.
Yeah.
And it resonated with me. I mean, Dr. Means has got such a great way of explaining mitochondrial health, our metabolism, how we get all of our energy from the sun. We convert that into food, plant and animal food, and then it's our body's chore to break down that food and turn it into energy efficiently so we can heal our body. So again, she does a great job of just explaining that in layman's terms. So, I like that. I called up her contact, started talking to her, and I said, well, this is the kind of information, because I remember Tucky said, you're going to change the world. And I don't disagree with that, okay? So I wanted to highlight that. I kind of learned that, got the formula. By the way, I think my public events are far more effective than hearings, because in hearings, it's just members of Congress, arguing and, grandstanding, that kind of stuff. My events, I didn't talk much, right? Mm-hmm. I gave an opening statement, and then I had a little discipline. I told all you guys, 600 words, keep it to that, and then answer questions. But I let the panelists talk. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, have you tracked how many views your presentation or clips of your presentation have had?
Oh, a lot. Oh my gosh. One of the clips I put out, and it was kind of an overview, that's in the millions. Right. I think my speech is something like 300,000, and then Dad's is similar. It was good. And then the clips did very well. Those roundtables are very popular.
Multiply that times, I think we had close to 24 presenters, each with an important thing to say. I still think, again, yours was fabulous. Dr. Chris Palmer, his one statement where he said, whoever they are, they don't want to discover the root cause.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that is the root cause right there. We can't ask the questions. Bobby Kennedy has been vilified for just saying, what's causing autism? I mean, could it be the fact we've gone from 3 to 85 doses and we're giving him multiple doses? I mean, could that be? I mean, could it be seed oil? I mean, I don't know. What I will say is I want to be a very honest arbiter of how this transpires. I mean, I know a lot of people in that panel have very strong opinions that it's this or that or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't expect you really listening to my opening statement. My final paragraph was basically making the statement that I'm amazed. It's a marvel how much mankind has learned at an accelerating pace. We know so much, but what we don't know vastly exceeds what we do.
That's for sure.
So we have to have that humility. So again, I don't want to blow up the ag culture industry. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I mean, if there are safe pesticides that help us feed the world, feed ourselves, I don't have a problem with that. But we ought to ask, because I think we've just been lied to that. Okay, GMO stuff is fine. Well, I don't know. Show me the uncorrupted science.
Yeah.
By people totally outside the industry, as opposed to what's been funded by the corporate interests. I mean, show me the truth, and that's going to take a while for us to really develop that or to analyze it and kind of come to those conclusions. But again, I know there are people going to be lining up to do everything they can to destroy Bobby and his efforts and keep him from being HHS secretary. I mean, I don't know, you probably don't know this, but within 2 weeks, over 200 agricultural interests, groups, wrote a letter to the chairman and ranking member of the House and the Senate Ag Committee, I immediately got a copy. They didn't mention me. They didn't mention our panel, but it was definitely directed at what we were exploring and just, saying we can't let this go on because we're going to destroy our agriculture industry. We're going to not be able to produce food. And again, is it maybe a little over the top? I think they have legitimate concerns that I think we need to address. We need to allay those concerns. And again, we just, we can't come in here gangbusters and say, okay, we got all the information. We know what the truth is. This is what we're going to do. I think we need to do is address the fundamentals. It's okay. How do we uncorrupt science? How do we set up a decent adversarial system? How do we get rid of the liability for vaccines, which is causing? That's why we have 85 doses. There's no liability. This is a money-making machine for pharmaceutical companies with no liability. That's a major. By the way, that's a major cost, which we have to understand. If we want life-saving new drugs, we can't be bankrupting companies, suing them all the time either. So this is a delicate balance. There's nothing easy about this. There's no ultimate. There is always ultimate truth, but it's difficult for us to discern it. So again, we need to approach this with a real humility and a genuineness of purpose of what we're trying to. Again, we're trying to understand what is causing autism. What a horrible thing to have happen to a family, and it's happening to more families almost at an exponential rate. What about chronic illness? Wouldn't our country, the world, be so much better if we could solve that? Well, in order to solve it, we have to ask the questions, and we haven't been allowed to ask the questions. So again, that's my main point: is allow us to ask the questions. Don't vilify, don't destroy the people that just have the honesty. Like Bobby Kennedy, he didn't seek this notoriety on childhood vaccines. It was thrust on him. When given the science, he just couldn't close his eyes. And understanding that there are people's livelihoods at stake, in food processing, in agriculture. I mean,
for sure.
We have to understand as well. So we have to understand the other people's perspective and just try and move forward as honestly as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the fear of having RFK Jr. come in is, this is what I hear from the left too, is he's going to cancel vaccines. Like, we're not going to have vaccines anymore. They don't understand that what he's looking for is transparency and no corruption, right? Like, it's reasonable. Even I had a terrible experience with antidepressants. It was very difficult to come off of them without withdrawal. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be available, but people should know about the side effects. That's about it. Like, I'm all for having the freedom to eat whatever you want, as long as people know and have science they can trust. What are the side effects? What are the risks for you? Like, smoke cigarettes if you want to smoke cigarettes, but at least you know what might happen, right? And that is so reasonable. It's so reasonable. I can't believe anybody has an issue with it.
Yeah, it's freedom, and government's role in guaranteeing that freedom is informed consent.
Yeah.
And that government ought to be here to be the arbiter in terms of, okay, you produce this, you need to do certain studies, they need to be honest, and then you have to inform the consumer. I mean, one of the famous moments, and I think this was one of my COVID events, is Dr. Renata Moon showed the insert for the vaccine. It's this big piece of paper. It says intentionally left blank. That they didn't provide any of the information that doctors would need to provide informed consent to their patients. They just rammed it down, and even worse, mandated it to the members of our military, to hospital workers, to so many. No, it was really. I mean, what they did to us and to society is unbelievable. But even maybe more unbelievable, but depressing, is how many people accepted it. Kind of like sheep to the slaughter. That's if people were informed. And again, the good news is we do have a free press. We have podcasts now. We've got alternate media. You can get the truth. It's getting more and more difficult to discern the truth because it's just not three networks with journalists who, they may be biased, but they pretty well keep the bias out and they're pretty fair and balanced. Okay, but that's relegated to the 60s, maybe into the 70s. Kind of went by the wayside. So again, I just applaud you for coming to my event, telling your story, having a podcast like this. I certainly appreciate being part of it, and happy to come back on sometime else when I've got more to say.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for all the updates. It was very informative. Good luck with everything. And I guess we'll see what happens in January.
Say hi to your dad for me.
I will. Thanks again for coming on. Oh, and before you go, if people want to find you online or find out more about you, where should they go?
We're easy to find. I really ought to memorize this. I think it's at Send Ron Johnson. I have no idea.
You know what? I'll link everything in the description.
I've got an X account. I've got all that stuff. Yeah. We're pretty easy to find.
Perfect. I'll link everything. Thank you again.
Take care. Bye.